All right, welcome to the Sumer Sports Show Saturday edition. It would not be a Saturday edition without the music, like
Playing
leading
twice.
in a little bit into
Your
the intro.
intro.
We have two straight podcasts for me this
Right.
week. I took a
This
week
is
off of podcasts a couple weeks ago. We did one last week with me and Ben. I'm here with Ben Brown, data scientist extraordinaire. I get like two of my best friends. I get to podcast with Tage on Friday. I get to podcast with Ben this morning. We got a mailbag episode yesterday. Go ahead and check it out. We talked all things positional value, Detroit Lions, all kinds of really fun stuff.
Jaguars.
Now we're going to get to talk about markets and all the good stuff. One thing I want to before first, like, look, let's have priorities. First thing, why the heck are the because you do this modeling for us at Sumer. Why the heck are the NFL draft betting markets so immature right now? And B, how are you doing? In that order.
In that order, well, I would be doing a lot better if we had a lot more NFL draft markets, I would say. But we have had some sprinkle in. I would say DraftKings in particular now has like first round odds for a lot of guys. Obviously, those one-way markets are really difficult to bet into because of a VIG perspective. But yeah, I think we were very much spoiled from a draft market perspective in the COVID season, in the 2021 season. And in a lot of ways, the books obviously took their licks and now are kind of in some ways retreating or just like not offering as many markets in the lead up to the draft for a number of reasons. I think we have like 12 total draft position markets for guys to specific positions, whereas that was like a very robust market in prior seasons as well. So it's been frustrating, but I'm doing relatively well. Like you said, I get to talk to you on a Saturday, one day after, maybe the greatest show in consumer sports history, I would say, with you and Tage running it back. I enjoyed it quite immensely. So tons of views. Obviously, the analytical side of things is great. But yeah, I think we're moving in the right direction. Saturday, I mean, the Masters are on, a lot of degeneracy happening. So it's the perfect time of season for us, even though football is not being played from the NFL streets. We got to look at the UFL streets instead.
Absolutely. So let's start with draft because we've seen. So let's just cut to the chase here. Let's go ahead and look at the odds. I know our friend, difficult, good friend of the show, actually, has said that he is a pretty big fan of us using the FanDuel odds, even though sometimes I think DraftKings does do a better job.
They have more markets, it seems like, obviously for lower limits, I would say, but it does seem like DraftKings at least is like offering, different markets right now.
But I do think the interface is quite good. There's very difficult. Our beat gamer friend is here as well. Jordan Morgan going in the first round might be a good bet, considering the Ravens basically did the same thing they did with Zay Flowers last year, Shrine Bowl with his pro day. Yeah, I mean, Jordan Morgan, I think the issue, we'd have to look at the going in the first round markets, which are very inflated, honestly. Not inflated, sorry. There's a lot of VIG in them. So you're almost always, if you're betting the yes, overpaying unless you have like Quay Walker-like information. You're almost always overpaying for those. Remember Desmond Ridder and Matt Corral being basically right around this time 2 years ago to go in the first round. So just remember that. But we do have actually some movement here. And I think some of this is due to Schefter, right? So we have Jaden Daniels for the number 1 overall pick. We're all adults here.
Locked and loaded.
Caleb Williams is going first. But Jaden Daniels has moved out a little bit. This has been the most he's been favored to be the second overall pick at -200. It's still not that big. I mean, and you do a lot of this modeling for us at Sumer, Ben. So I really want to ask you the question because the thing is when you actually look at the number, when you show more, there's a ton of players here, right? And so in this modeling, it's actually not trivial to come up with a VIG-free price for this because we posted this stuff to Sumer. Like if you take all these options and devig them, you get much lower than the 66.6% break even percentage that Jaden Daniels will go second, right? There's overround in these markets, and there's even more in these markets than there would be for, say, a side or a total. However, I think in modeling sometimes, because of the nature of this beast, which is that sometimes the answer to this question is known a priori. sometimes you want to you oftentimes with the favorite don't actually want to devig the favorite. So there are questions I think that are associated with this historically. What is your approach to this?
Yeah, very much. And I think it is different. And obviously, coming up with a big free number for, a two-sided market that really, only has like the two entries is much different than, devigging a market like a multi-way market like this, particularly in general. Because kind of like I think you said this a couple of weeks ago, but like the top end guy or the highest priced guy in a lot of these markets really probably doesn't actually have a lot of like big associated with it. I think the books are in some ways hiding a lot of the big on the plus price opportunities. So you almost want to come up, at least from like a modeling perspective, especially if you're trying to figure out like the probability for Jaden Daniels selection at 2 overall. Like in a lot of ways, you almost want to leave that minus 200 price at the implied number and devig the rest of the market on the plus prices, because that's where I think the books are actually hiding a lot of the various like intricacies of it. But you're looking at this market, like I don't have the numbers specifically for FanDuel, but you're looking at a market where, you have like a 50% VIG associated with all of these numbers basically, and removing Jaden Daniels and adjusting it based on that is going to dramatically reduce his overall odds. And I just don't know, especially from a modeling standpoint. Obviously betting is different, but if you're using these as inputs into models, there is some different adjustments that you absolutely have to make to kind of arrive at a correct big free number for Jaden Daniels at the number 2 overall pick. And I think it is much closer to the implied probability as opposed to like the traditional big free number that you're going to arrive at just doing it with a straight line approach.
Yeah, and again, like what this is somewhat implying, which is somewhat incongruent with what I've said before, which is don't bet the favorite in these markets. That's not necessarily what I'm just saying is more from a modeling standpoint. Like I think that there's more incentive for the books to add the over round to the dogs in this case because this market is so uncertain and
Right.
there's not as much variance. The variance is different in this market than it is in an NFL game. If you get caught with a bad number as a sports bettor or a bookmaker in an NFL game, the ball could bounce a certain way. There's all kinds of the variance in an NFL game is known. It changes over time because of differences in scoring and rules and everything. But to an extent, like the distribution is a certain way, and so you can go back and like understand kind of what the if a book hangs a number, what the vig free odds should be, and so forth. In these kind of markets, it's actually not clear because the historical, for example, like we have years where the number 1 pick being a huge favorite means something. The first overall pick being kind of a moderate favorite means another thing. And there's only so many years of this rich of draft, and so we don't really have a huge sample size to go off of. And so it's kind of weird. The one thing I do want to ask you, because Schefter came out and talked about his reasoning for sticking his neck out and saying Jaden Daniels was going second. And that's really, I think, where this move is coming from. We talked about on a previous podcast. I love Chiefs Kingdom coming in here. Eric, who are we taking? We.
It's always a we. It's always a we.
Two-time defending Super Bowl champion Kansas City Chiefs 3 times in the last 5 years. Kansas City.
Pat January.
Good question. We'll get to that at the end. I think here's my thing on Schefter. Okay. Schefter doesn't know. I'm not trying to be a dick, but like Schefter doesn't know who the Commanders are picking. And he even said as much on the show that everybody's pointing to and saying is the reason why Daniels is the pick at 2. He literally said he's connecting the dots from what he's hearing around the league, which again, we said Adam Peters comes from the 49ers, who are very good at not leaking things, who are very good at concealing information. They had Peter King and Schefter himself all convinced that Mac Jones was the pick.
At 3, yep.
At 3 in 2021. So again, I'm not saying that Daniels is not the pick. Like this is where I come back and say, I don't think Daniels is not the pick. I'm just saying at this point, I don't think that any of the reasons that have been proposed by the media are the reason why Daniels is the pick. I think it's all speculation. I don't think there's any inside information. And I think that most of these media folks that claim they have inside information, there is
it's still not the decision makers in some ways, right? Like,
go ahead.
yeah.
Yep.
Well, I was just gonna say it's basically not like the actual like Schefter doesn't have a line to Adam Peters, so in a lot of ways, like, and I think I can't remember off the top of my head who actually had the tweet, but like the draft boards, I still think are very much in flux for some teams, and this is very much the situation where the coaches, where the coaches are kind of like getting involved with the process and kind of also going through it, and there is some give and take still happening in a lot of these discussions. Even at the number 2 overall pick, I would say I don't think there's like certainty even within the Washington Commanders building. So the fact that other people are projecting that, I think, is a miss. And like you said, it doesn't mean that Jaden Daniels isn't going to be the number 2 overall selection, but I don't think the market moving in that direction because of an insider report is necessarily the correct reflection of where this market uncertainty actually exists.
So let's like summarize kind of our take here before we move on to others. There is a chance that these markets are mostly vigging the dogs, which means there could be value on the favorites in some of these markets. However, in the case of Daniels, the market is probably overreacting to authoritative voices in the space that don't actually have the goods in this situation. So you have to balance those out. And to me, that makes this a no. If you're betting, it makes it a no bet on Daniels. Like I just do not see a case where you can go in and lay it with Daniels. And look, the opportunity cost is not that big. You're not able to get all that much down on Daniels right now. You know, you could probably sprinkle around different markets and everything like that. But again, and so if he ends up being the second pick and you laid the price, good for you. I know we laid, what was it, minus 150 with Zach Wilson really early, and you know, it ended up closing as a huge favorite, and it was a good one, but it was still a sweat, right? It was still a sweat because there's still uncertainty in this process. And so I would just say, you know, I would just not bet this particular pick if I were anybody, because again, there are people who are very connected who are connecting the dots, but they're mostly doing it off of analysis. And like, no offense to Schefter, but like his analysis of football is not particularly good. This is a good question. This is a good statement here. Oddsmakers have said that draft odds reflect public perception, not really inside information. Well, that's not true, though. I mean, once it leaked that Lance was the Niners pick on the day of the draft, the odds moved, right? Like that. So it clearly moves off of inside information. I mean, bookmakers try to create a price that's reflective of reality so that they can take the most bets at the highest limits at the biggest, at the best numbers. Like that's what they do. They don't try to balance action. They don't do it like it's literally trying to predict the market at those particular, you know, at those particular time
intervals.
But there are, I would just say, I think that there are protective measures that they're taking, like, you know, vigging the underdogs maybe a little bit more than the favorite.
I mean, look at Arjun. The guy goes on NFL Network and now he's throwing grenades at Shefty basically in the chat.
Yeah, like Arjun, our former intern at PFF, one of the greats. One of the great up and coming minds in sports analytics. Shefty doesn't know ball. By the way, he went on NFL Network last night with
congratulations. I watched it. It was great. I mean, he crushed it. I thought a lot of his takes as well for the draft were completely spot on. But I did want to mention one thing Beat Gamer said a little earlier, and it kind of ties into finishing up this on number 2 overall discussion. But obviously, Jaden Daniels moving forward. A lot of it Schefter. It does seem even more and more people, like big name people, especially from the quarterback evaluation standpoint, are pushing back on Drake May even more than what they were in the past couple of weeks. I think like Chris Sims came out with it, you know, the Sam and Steve's at PFF. Like a lot of people are, you know, discussing and talking about Drake May's mechanics, you know, his inability to probably process after the first read. Like there are, I think, you know, there are concerns, I would say, that maybe that gap is widening because of the analysis of some public-facing figures that have a lot of influence. Take that for what it's worth. You know, they could very much obviously be correct in that evaluation, but going back to it, like, I think there's reasons to buy into Drake May despite somewhat sloppy mechanics in certain situations. So
and I you know, last night on the Sumer Sports Show 2024 Draft Show on Sirius XM Channel 88, which will repeat on Sirius XM at times this weekend, Thomas Dimitroff, you know, he basically said that like most people that are talking about mechanics at the quarterback position don't really know what they're talking about. people who are trying to ding Drake May for last year are maybe being a little bit overzealous. Anyway, so we got this we got this very opaque wow from very difficult. I wonder if that's a wow in the positive direction or a wow in the negative direction from our friend.
We always take it positively unless we can
I'm just
imply
going to take it
otherwise.
positively. Okay, let's look at number 3 overall pick. Because Daniels is a favorite at 2, it looks like May is the favorite at 3. McCarthy is driving this down. I have gotten the more and more, and we've gotten a lot of media requests over the last like 2 or 3 weeks. It's ramping up now. I just Arjun Menon's brutal attack.
Thank you for clarifying that. At least we definitely appreciate it, right?
Okay. I'm more confident than I ever have been that JJ McCarthy is going to fall. The more people I talk to, the more people are kind of souring on him. They're kind of having second thoughts about him. It's really, really hard NFL draft and for entities in general to overcome the weight of history. And history has been that if you are not a very productive, toolsy quarterback, you are going to have a hard time getting drafted with a very, very premium pick. I think that the Vikings, there was that report that came out that Houston was the one that approached Minnesota about acquiring pick 23, which kind of feels like now that they traded for Diggs, that kind of makes some sense, even though on its face it looked kind of weird. So now the Vikings having 11 and 23 as Houston's choice, not theirs, now makes it seem like, and Kwesi is kind of more in this ilk of, okay, we'll go up and get Drake May, right? Because he's a premium player at this position. But JJ McCarthy is going to have to wait till 11 because he's going to be a player that we have to build around. His press conference talked as much about it, Ben, where he said, if it's all about kind of balancing the act between premium, how good the quarterback is versus how much support he needs. And if you're going to trade up for a guy, he's got to be that impervious player. I mean, it's basically the whether or not a quarterback should start article that I wrote a couple weeks ago. Whereas if he's more of a guy that needs support, you can't be trading up those assets.
Right. And it is the correct take. And I think to me, what it signals is that Kwesi's not going to make this move till draft day. I think reports that, he is locked into any one of combination of Drake May, JJ McCarthy, or Jaden Daniels. Even if that's correct, I still think he needs to see how the draft actually plays out before he goes up and makes that decision of who he's actually going to select there. Because if that is the actual case, there's more likelihood that he's going to stay at 11 and kind of wait and see how things unfold with New England. Because if he has the option B of whatever happens with New England at pick 3, like he could probably wait through picks 4 and maybe even pick 5 to actually go up and get that guy. And I think that changes the calculus of what he needs to give up. And I think waiting in that particular instance is correct. But I actually don't agree that he's confident in all 3 of these guys. And going back to it, I think he's probably identified one. I would personally believe that that's Drake May. Obviously, could be proven wrong, but I'm in agreement with you that JJ McCarthy. I still think, despite the red flags that everyone's pointing out, Drake May is probably the most likely one of these guys to fall into that, 8 to 10 to 11, 12, 13 range.
I just tweeted out, last week I remember saying that if Kwesi got Drake May, I would move. I would fly back, and you and I would start soldering the statue for Kwesi next to US Bank Stadium. And I would, I wouldn't be a Vikings fan again, maybe, but I would. I've always wanted the Vikings to succeed, even after I sort of moved away and everything. I would actively root for them because I would love to see people like you see your favorite team win a championship. I think this 4th pick is interesting because this is another one where we've seen the odds on Marvin Harrison go down. Like the odds on Marvin Harrison become cheaper. The odds on JJ McCarthy, kind of equilibrate there at 4 to 1. This is one again where I just don't think at market prices you can really touch this. I do think somebody who's holding a JJ McCarthy 4th overall ticket at 4-1 is going to feel really good at on draft night, and you're going to be like, shit, he went 11. That had no chance. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Right.
it's like Levis, right? And I that's my take. Again, you can clip this and make me look like an idiot later on, but I just don't know if McCarthy. I think that was a complete smokescreen. I think it's Dwayne Haskins. I think it's Mac Jones. I think it's that kind of it's Jordan Love. I think it's that kind of pick all over again. And this is to say nothing about what I think his prospects are at the NFL level, Ben. But I just think that was a complete smokescreen at the beginning.
Yeah, I'm in a complete agreement on you. I do think in general, like we've talked about it, ad nauseum, so I won't go into it too much. But the Cardinals staying here just makes too much sense to me. I think one interesting market that was released relatively recently is like the perfect or the exact order of the top 3 selections. In some ways, obviously, a little bit of chaos happening at pick 2 is going to, greatly change the distribution for what you're looking at from a payout perspective in that market. But I think if you're not convinced, like we are, of JJ McCarthy going in the top 3, there are a few different ways potentially you could play that bet and not have to lay such a heavy price on some of these favorites in order to kind of get the benefit of what they add into that equation, I would say. So that's maybe like the only other look I would say. But a lot of these, have kind of, we've got top 10 now. I think we were at top 8 last week, if I remember correctly. We got a top 10 market now as well. Again, going back to a multi-way market's kind of difficult, but there's a lot still hopefully to come in the NFL draft market. But I think it's at least moving in the right direction now here in the last week. But it's definitely taken a slow process to develop for sure.
Yeah. Let's talk briefly about this one because I do think that this one is interesting, and then we will go to top 10 and top 5 markets. And then we'll move on to the UFL and we'll wrap it up because I know Ben has got to go play dad duty and watch some hockey. I'm going to the Atlanta Vibe tonight, the professional volleyball league team.
That's a vibe too, man. Look at you. That's dad life.
I might be the only one in the arena watching also a spring league football game and the volleyball game at the same time. But this one's interesting to me, Ben, because I was on the Hammer Network and I got to be the New England Patriots. And I traded out of 3 with the Vikings. And then I moved up to 5 to get Malik Neighbors. And then I moved back up to 10 to get Joe Alt, who inexplicably fell. It's probably never going to happen. But that's kind of where was my thought. I do think the Chargers trade this pick. And so then the question becomes, which of these players is the player that teams are going to trade up for? I can see Neighbors being that player, and that's why he's a favorite here. I actually don't hate 2-1 as the thought, because if it goes the 3 quarterbacks, Harrison, Neighbors, that makes a lot of sense to me.
It does make a lot of sense.
Joe Alt is a weird one. I think Joe Alt makes a lot of sense at 7 to the Titans, to a Hall of Fame offensive line coach, to an offense that needs an offensive lineman. At 5 are the Chargers with Corey Krawick, our friend, analytics, director of player personnel, from the Ravens. Are they going to take a right tackle at 5? I just don't know. But a trade back, is a team going to trade up for Joe Alt is a question. I just don't see it. But offensive linemen are coveted in the NFL. And my only issue with this, and is the fact that there are teams, Ben, right, that have Oli Fashanu and players like that graded higher than Alt. So that's like my only question. And I know teams have Neighbors higher than Harrison, right? Like that's been reported, and I trust that. So I think Neighbors is at 5 the best pick here, and at plus 200 is probably not a terrible flyer to take.
Yeah, I mean, to me, the question kind of going back to it again is like the quarterback trade up. If you don't believe in someone like the Vikings wanting to leap up in front of the Giants and take like the 4th quarterback off the board, or if that trade hasn't materialized at pick 3, like that would be the one wrench in that plan. But to me, it is very clearly Malik Neighbors. If the Chargers, stay in this particular draft position, I think we've heard, rumblings everywhere that, Jim Harbaugh's like, infatuated with Joe Alt. I do understand that, and yet it could still very much not be the correct decision from the front office standpoint. Like you said, Rashawn Slater kind of creates a necessity to move Joe Alt to right tackle, which could be concerning. Like you said, at the 5th overall selection, getting your guy. We have seen, teams like the Detroit Lions do that previously with Penei Sewell in that sort of same draft position range, but it just seems like an overdraft in that particular scenario. So I do think, both Marvin Harrison Jr. and Joe Alt are probably out in this discussion. That's very much a question of, do you want to go with the favorite of Neighbors at 2-1 odds, or is this a spot where the trade up actually happens for the quarterback and you like one of, Drake May or JJ McCarthy in that situation?
Yeah. And I think, Beat Gamer makes a really good point here, which is that the Ravens love to trade back, but that's normally later in the first. And that is a good point. If you go to my article at Sumer Sports about trade curves, there is a little bit of once that premiumness of the draft falls off, then trading back is sharp and more sharp than even normal, which trading back is generally sharp anyway, especially for long-term teams like the Eagles, Ravens, Browns, Vikings, teams that have, I think stable ownership, stable GMing, stable that. Then trading back from from the late teens into later is sharp because you may lose the premium position player, and that's where the Ravens have gotten Linderbaum. And they also got Hamilton, who was a non-premium player at 14, but that was a value. But they got Linderbaum later in that draft. And again, that was after all of the tackles, wide receivers that anybody wanted were picked over. It was a very good pick for them. The Ravens' former group trading out of 5 when there are Neighbors and Alts and Oli Fashanu's and possibly Marvin Harrison's. That's a different story to your point, Beat Gamer, and that could mean that they just sit there and take the player and pair. The more pillar players you can put on that offense, Slater, Herbert, of course, and then let's say Alt or Neighbors or something like that, the better. That might just be their way, and they could try to win early there. Let's look at the top 5 markets. So let me actually.
Yeah, I mean, that's a little bit about it has a little bit of price baked in for Neighbors going 4th, obviously, with the 5th overall selection potentially being plus 200, this plus 185. To me, I don't really agree with that. So I think in a lot of ways, you're probably looking, I don't know, this is a real tough market because obviously you're not going to lay any sort of decent minus price, but it seems at least relatively locked in that it's probably going to be one of 6 guys going in the top 5, in my opinion. I don't really see. I mean, I honestly, I see there's 6 guys. Obviously, one of them is going to fall out. What one that is, who knows? But it is going to be one of those 6 guys, and they're very much locked in at this point. And the one real guy that is probably in that discussion is Neighbors as the 6th. His odds are right here, kind of
some long shots could be Roma Dunze at 16-1.
Yeah, if people like him more than Neighbors or Harrison Jr., which I think is kind of tough to ask. I don't think defensive player goes, and if it's anybody at the tackle position, it has to be Joe Alt to me. I could be wrong on that. So I don't know. Maybe there's a Brock Bowers discussion. Yeah,
Fashanu or Fuaga are possibilities at those prices. That would be a place to go if you're looking to turn a little money into a lot of money. That could be a place for sure.
Yeah. I think the Brock Bowers conversation is kind of petered off to the point where he's probably not even worth a flyer at 40-1 there. So it's a tough market, like you said. Tons of vig associated with it with these one-sided markets. Obviously, if Circa or somebody else comes out with a 2-way market on some of these, which they have done previously, not last year, that's very much a spot to kind of hammer down on if you can get some decent no prices, I would say.
Yeah. Here's a good one from Dan. Our Team X to pick Y positions good bets. Basically, the underdogs in those markets are the only values. The favorites are pretty. We had this discussion earlier, but the favorites are pretty. There's a lot of overround there, and I it's just hard for me because I think that NFL. It's not because of the VIG. It's because we as a media community do not understand the meaning of the draft, and these teams themselves oftentimes do not understand the meaning of the draft. So when we look at like the Chiefs need a wide receiver, the Chiefs have needed a wide receiver for 3 years, and they've never taken one in round one. And the reason for that is because the Chiefs have figured out over the course of the last like 3-4 years some really sharp things. Like they went from a team that took Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Ben, at 32 to a team that's drafting premium position players and stashing them on the bench and being ready. Felix Anazuke-Uzama was literally a luxury pick. Everybody talked about Clyde Edwards-Helaire being a luxury pick. No.
Yeah.
Felix Anazuke-Uzama is a luxury pick. Myles Murphy to the Bengals is a luxury pick. Van Ness to the Packers, Rashawn Gary to the Packers are luxury picks. These teams that have the luxury of being good, and Nolan Smith, Eagles, all those teams that are good that don't like we look at them like, what do they need? The Eagles need a corner. The teams that are good don't draft for need. And so that the favorite in those markets, and then teams that decide to start acting smart, it's out of the blue or it's by chance. But in either way, the favorite in those markets are not a value.
Yeah, and I definitely agree with you. It's not a market that I've played a ton in the past, and I don't have like a ton of historical data on. But to me, just empirically or intuitively, I would go along the lines of what you just said, right? I think there's probably some value in just identifying premium positions that teams probably don't necessarily have a need for and are going to be priced at a pretty decent number. And from there, you can kind of just pick off. And I do think it's somewhat clear, the teams that have at least been somewhat sharp from a drafting perspective previously, and you could maybe buy into that. And I think that would help you identify some more opportunities to bet into some of these markets, because they actually aren't, I would say, some of like the heaviest juiced or heaviest bigged up markets coming from the draft. And I think for that reason, they're definitely at least worth an exploration.
Yeah. And we're going to have a mock draft at Sumer the next 2 weeks that we hope is predictive. I know I've done mocks in the past, kind of like the what would I do? And of course, like they score horribly in grinding the mocks because like what I would do is not what the league would do. And of course, like we've all learned in the past as well. So for example, defensive tackles have been valued more than they were maybe 3, 4, 5 years ago, which has evolved a little bit. And but we're gonna have that out sometime this week at Sumer Sports. Let's do one more market before we move on to the UFL. Who's going in the top 10? I look at this thing, and again, these are ones where if you get too overconfident, obviously, and you lay too big of a price, you can get kind of skunked. The one that's interesting to me is Dallas Turner at -110. Steve Palazzolo, our former colleague at PFF, tweeted out the Rams, and we saw it in the playoff game. They had like Michael Hoyt as an edge player covering wide receivers. Like they do drop their edge players into coverage. Turner played in an Alabama system that really prized that a little bit. So while Latu, and Jared have a lot going for them, maybe they're not necessarily as versatile, and maybe the Falcons may prize that at 8 with Raheem Morris. If they don't, right, then Dallas Turner may scoot out of the top 10 altogether, right? So the question is like what you have to do if you're going to bet this is you have to go and ask yourself and price this out yourself. What's the likelihood he goes 8? What's the likelihood he goes 9? I don't think he goes 7 or earlier. What's the likelihood he goes any one of those, and make a determination as to which one is the better play. Beat Gamer asked, are we doing a draft show with Thomas this year again? We are on Thursday night. We also are going to have some content live from Detroit from some of our creators here, including Ben. And then we're going to have the Sirius XM show on Saturday morning, previewing day 3 with myself and Dimitrov on Channel 88. So that should be fun. Ben, which one of these do you like the most before we go on?
I mean, I'm with you on the edge rushers. I do think in a lot of ways, like you could arrive at a relatively fair price with Dallas Turner at -110, just using, 8th overall odds. I do think he does have a draft position market out there. I want to say on Caesars right now, but I could be wrong on that. So I don't hate that look. To me, I still am like really intrigued with Quinion Mitchell as like a top 10 draft pick. Obviously Cooper DeJean had a pretty decent workout in the last couple of weeks, has risen up cornerback draft boards. But I think in some ways there is a distinction between Mitchell and the rest of the cornerbacks that are going to be available. I do think there's a team that could potentially like him as a top 10 pick. So at, like 4.3 to 1, I don't at least hate a flyer on that as sort of somebody that can provide value in that middle round. And I don't think he has a ton of vig based on a true price for that number right now.
I like Mitchell there is a lot. Yeah, that to me is the one that stands out. And we've seen corners with that profile drafted higher than expected. And especially you think about CJ Henderson. You think about JC Horn. You think about like the corner that wasn't considered at the beginning of the process to be the best corner, sliding up draft boards is that's Quinion Mitchell, and so historically he might be the belle of the ball at that particular spot. Let's move on to the UFL and close this thing out. What a day! We by the way, if you look at like the season long odds. San Antonio Brahmas, if you look at Sumer Sports, we do have our simulation up there. The Brahmas at 5 to 1 are really the only value I think left. They do play the Battlehawks tomorrow. They are banged up a little bit, and they are underdogs at home. So that matchup between those two, which we'll talk about, is probably gonna go a decent way to determine who's gonna play the Stallions in the championship, and hence who you get to hedge your futures against when you go ahead and see the championship game. But let's go ahead and start with this first game. Arlington actually opened as a dog.
Moved heavily. When I looked last, it was -1 basically. I want to say for Arlington, wasn't it?
Yeah, they opened I think +1.5, +2, and then now it's kind of trended completely their way. Total's 43. I've seen it as low as 42.5, maybe 42. I've seen as high as 43.5. We made this game -1.5, so obviously, it moved in our direction. I think maybe it swung a little bit too far, but obviously these points in this league, still determining kind of a robust measure for how much each one of them is worth, given how little sample we have. But also waiting and seeing on team strength. We only have 2 weeks, so there's a lot of variance, of course, in the estimate of the team strengths between the two. DC has looked pretty bad, I think, for the most part. They got beat by Memphis in the first game, and this past week they gave up a defensive touchdown to Houston. They gave up a touchdown early in the second half. They gave up a long play where they created a fumble, and that was basically what helped them win the game. And that game was a 5.5 point spread on open. They won by 5. So if you took the dog early, closed out. This has been an interesting market here. I don't really have a big opinion here. I think that Arlington is 0-2. I think they're a lot better than being 0-2. If I look at my team ratings here of the teams, which again is based upon a combination of PFF grades and efficiency stats, I would make Arlington probably the 5th best team in the league, which is, like I said, is below average, but it's not by much. I think there are 3 teams that are above average, and then they're like a little clump in the middle. They're part of that little clump in the middle. Ben, if your book offers teasers though at a 43 total, this feels like a way to go. DC up to 8.5. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I don't mind the teaser. Scroll down a little bit. Is there any other opportunities? Basically,
there is.
Roll them in. So you could go Birmingham down to 1, maybe. To me, I'm really worried about the Roughnecks Panthers situation, especially with the Roughnecks. I think their starting quarterback Jared McConnell is going to be out for like a month. Lost like their top end receiver as well. To me, that market is in some ways still moved in the Roughnecks direction. I don't know. I don't have your power rankings in front of me, but I feel like the Roughnecks are very much along the lines as like one of the worst teams in the UFL, if not the worst team. Yeah. So I don't mind Michigan in this spot tomorrow, given the injury situation that the Roughnecks are going to be dealing with. But
So let's start with that game so tomorrow's early game, and then we'll circle back to Birmingham, Memphis. So Michigan has EJ Perry at quarterback. He was briefly replaced and then went back in. He's been mostly dreadful for them. Right. But but Houston actually, they were able, Reed Stinnett came in and actually was somewhat decent last week. I think a lot of people believe, not a lot of people, this is not a well followed league, but like the people, at least initially, believe that bet this down from +3 to +1.5. I think believe that he's an upgrade. And I think that that's where that's going. Be that as it may, the total is 37.5. I just think that they believe that this game is going to be low scoring and hence lower variance. And
Right.
that's why the spread's gone down as well.
All right, Birmingham. You're Birmingham Stallions then, basically.
Yeah, this
right?
game has been. I make the game 6, which I don't think that there's a value on 7. It might be at 7.5 or so. But yeah, this one's interesting. 40.5 being the total. Memphis should have beaten San Antonio last week, but they gave up a huge lead, 16-point lead, 11-point lead.
Was it 19-7 basically with a minute to go?
It was a really rough finish for them. Cookus has played pretty well, but they can't finish in the red zone. Even in the first game as a win over DC, they couldn't really finish in the red zone, and hence it was a really tough. It's been a really tough first 2 weeks for them. I think they are moving the ball better than their points scored have suggested, but Birmingham is an absolute wagon and has so far, they got out of Michigan with winning. It was basically landing right on the biggest number of 7. They did cover the closing number of 4.5. But it's been, I think Birmingham is kind of the class of this league right now. I wouldn't lay 340 or -7, -120 here, but it's really hard to sort of back up the truck and take Memphis here. The last game before we let you go, Ben, St. Louis laying 2. This is where it opened. It kind of traveled down to 1, but then it's gone back. San Antonio has a tough injury report, which is been tough here. The DFS community thinks this is the game to stack because these are the two offenses that move the ball the best. St. Louis came back from behind and beat Arlington last week at home. In the first game, they lost on a 64-yard field goal to Michigan. It's been up and down for our friend Bruce Gadkowski, a fellow PFF alumni. And in San Antonio, of course, they had 1 first down in the first half last week after playing a pretty good offensive game in the first half of week 1. So they have 2 good halves on offense, 2 terrible halves of offense. So for this one, to me, I do make the Brahmas a favorite in this game. I do think it's hashtag wrong team favored here. So to me, it's dog and over. That's my only strong opinion on this week of UFL slate.
Yeah, I gotta ride with your Brahmas for sure as well. I do think maybe, kind of like you said, it is going to be an interesting injury situation for the Brahmas. Maybe waiting until closer to the game time. Maybe you get a 2.5 or something. But I'm with you. I think this is going to be the kind of the showcase game on Sunday. I'm looking forward to a lot of points being scored. Is the highest total of the week, I believe. Actually, the first game has the highest total, doesn't it? Like 43.5.
Yeah.
So
and I
would
think
say totals in general totals in general have kind of moved up a little bit. Just based on where they were at.
Which is crazy because the closing total is 2 and 6.
6 and 2, yeah, 6 and 2.
And if you took the best of it, it's 1 and 7 to the over. Like if you took the under and you got the best of it, it's 1 and 7 to the over. So it's been a league, but a lot of the totals have been close calls. I mean, I think the markets have actually been fairly sharp. When it comes to totals, like there have been games like that have landed either pushed or things like that. But yeah, I mean, maybe it's 1, 6 and 1 if you got the best of it. I think the last game on Sunday went over the close and under. So very difficult. Has a good point here. In the last year in the XFL, no one scored in the first 2 weeks, and then it picked it up. That was also in the USFL. It's kind of the opposite.
Right.
First couple weeks there was actual scoring, and then it slowed down a little bit in the second half. But yeah, it's a very good point, but very difficult, and we will see. The only issue I do have is things that won't improve are coaching decisions, and these coaches continue to make some flummoxing decisions on 4th down.
Yeah,
it'll be flummoxing though if you did not subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. Go ahead and give it a like. Go ahead and follow Ben on Twitter at Brown with the underscores between the Ben, the R, and the Brown. Follow us at Sumer Sports. And again, we'll be live Thursday night of the NFL draft with the draft show with myself, Thomas Mitchoff, produced by Matt Stofsky with interludes by our friends from Detroit, Ben Brown, Tage Seth, Sean's side, Sam Brookhouse. It'll be a lot of fun. This has been a great Saturday show. For Ben Brown, for Eric Eager, for producer Matt Stopsky, this has been the Sumer Sports Show.